buonasera a tutti, benvenuti a questo terzo e ultimo appuntamento della Fondazione Le Fornaris dedicato ai Musei dell'Arte sui temi della fotografia contemporanea da un lato e sulla fotografia e il collezionismo museale dall'altro. Non ripeterò quello che è stato già ripetuto nelle volte precedenti, nel senso che ormai siete tutti, come dire, abituati, siete sempre meno, sempre più coraggiosi. Io sono molto contento che siete qua con questo tempo terrificante, però insomma ci siete e valeva la pena appunto di presentare il terzo appuntamento di un ciclo che, come ho sempre ribadito, è stato ideato da Antonella Russo, specialista della fotografia italiana e contemporanea, non solo italiana ovviamente, che ha proposto un ciclo lo scorso anno, un breve ciclo lo scorso anno in De Fornaris, che aveva appunto pubblicato due importanti pubblicazioni, volumi sulla storia della fotografia italiana e sulla scena torinese, in particolare soprattutto per la seconda puntata negli anni precedenti, e che in questo secondo ciclo ci ha proposto di leggere la fotografia israeliana contemporanea dal punto di vista di un curatore di museo come quello del Museo della città di Tel Aviv, in tutte le sue sfaccettature da un lato, e poi ci ha fatto proiettare in un altro continente, effettivamente in un'altra piccola dimensione, quella del Lussemburgo, dove un collega, Paul Di Felice, ha raccontato invece un'esperienza totalmente differente, cioè quella di come una rivista di fotografia che vuole essere di cultura, vuole essere di tendenza in un territorio sostanzialmente deserto, generi tutta una serie di conseguenze fino al punto che poi esiste poi un museo che si occupa anche di fotografia, esiste anche un collezionismo di fotografia, e quindi si è creato un terreno fertile partendo da una scommessa semplicemente culturale e in tempi evidentemente non proprio recentissimi. Il terzo appuntamento di questa sera è quello dedicato alla proposta di lettura di un certo taglio, insomma, della collezione fotografica dell'Albertina da parte di Walter Moser, che è il nostro terzo e ultimo ospite, giovanissimo rispetto agli standard italiani, e che Antonella Russo appunto vi introdurrà. Grazie.
Allora, grazie a tutti gli intervenuti. E volevo semplicemente ricordare appunto che questo terzo incontro è il terzo e l'ultimo di un secondo ciclo dei lunedì dell'arte dedicato alla fotografia. Qual è veramente la questione che abbiamo cercato di analizzare è come se la sta cavando il museo circondato da questi tsunami continui di immagini fotografiche che praticamente si riversano, che sono tutti intorno al museo, al luogo dunque deputato all'arte. Come vi ricordate abbiamo cominciato con la storia breve del Centro Studi Archivio della Comunicazione di Parma, e poi abbiamo continuato invece con un'indagine sul museo che possiamo chiamare un museo postmoderno, la Tate Modern, dove la fotografia in realtà non entra in un dipartimento ma entra direttamente nella collezione permanente della Tate Modern. In questo ciclo di incontri non ci siamo soltanto concentrati sull'Europa, anzi siamo andati in Medio Oriente, in Israele, dove Nili Goren ci ha spiegato l'attività del museo che viene chiamato TAMA, Tel Aviv Museum of Art, dove il Dipartimento di Fotografia in realtà esiste dal 1977, con un'attività che dal 99 è un'attività costante di mostre, 3-4 mostre all'anno, che sono mostre sponsorizzate in parte da privati, in parte dalla città di Tel Aviv, e dove esiste una collezione di fotografia che si basa su donazioni che però vengono accettate tramite una selezione del comitato scientifico, quindi non sono donazioni aperte. Una interessante, diciamo, conferenza è stata quella di Paul Di Felice che menzionava Riccardo Passoni. Perché? Perché Paul Di Felice può essere considerato un pioniere, ha cominciato a promuovere la fotografia all'inizio degli anni 70 in Lussemburgo, dove non esisteva un museo di arte moderna e contemporanea, non esisteva un dipartimento di arte nell'università, e ha pensato di fondare una rivista, che è proprio un tipico fenomeno degli anni 80, una rivista di grande formato di fotografia, che è esistita fino al 1996, ci ricordava, e poi si è trasformato in un sito web. Questa rivista, che si intitolava Caffè Cream, è diventata una casa editrice con una distribuzione in musei d'arte, e organizzava anche mostre di fotografia. Queste mostre di fotografia, le opere fotografiche della rivista e in parte opere fotografiche delle mostre organizzate da Caffè Cream, sono poi state acquisite dal Mudam, che è il Museo del Lussemburgo. Nel 2006 invece ha rilanciato questa attività fotografica con il Mois europei della fotografia, cioè è diventato il corrispondente in Lussemburgo di questo festival organizzato dal 2005 da Jean-Luc Monterosso, e che oggi coinvolge 7 capitali europee, quindi non solo Lussemburgo, Parigi, Vienna, Bratislava, Lubiana, Budapest. E fatto ancora più interessante è che ogni capitale organizza centinaia di mostre di fotografia, quindi è un fenomeno particolare, potremmo dire un fenomeno a parte, che è extramuseale, con mostre extramuseali, ma ci sono anche mostre di fotografia in gallerie d'arte moderna. Bene, l'ultimo incontro è con Walter Moser, uno dei più giovani curatori, anzi è un capo curatore dell'Albertina Museum, l'Albertina che naturalmente tutti conosciamo perché custodisce la più importante collezione al mondo di grafica. E Walter viene in realtà dall'Austrian Film Museum di Vienna, è stato curatore in questo museo, e dal 2011 è curatore, capo curatore dell'Albertina Museum, e ha curato già diverse mostre, come per esempio Joel Sternfeld, Body as Protest del 2012, Louis Boltz, una grande retrospettiva dedicata al grande fotografo americano, e più recentemente, in realtà, mentre parlavamo e organizzavamo questo incontro, in aprile ha inaugurato Blow Up, Antonioni's Film Classic and Photography, lo scorso aprile, che ancora potete visitare se vi trovate a Vienna. Stasera Walter ci parla della Albertina, della collezione di fotografia dell'Albertina Museum, e il titolo della conferenza è To See More Closely, che è poi una frase di Antonioni, del quale appunto di Blow Up ci parlerà Walter, che accogliamo con un bel applauso.
It's a pleasure to speak at such an ambitious program in the Galleria d'Arte Moderna. Today I would like to talk to you about the photographic collection of the Albertina, and in the next half hour I will focus actually on 3 topics. The first topic is the organization of the photographic department in the Albertina. Another part of my talk is on the organization of the collection and some of its major highlights. And the third part is on the exhibition program of the Albertina. Maybe let's start with the basics. The Albertina is an art museum in the city center of Vienna. It is a big Viennese palace in neoclassical style that houses the largest graphic collection in the entire world. And the collection was founded 1805 by Albert of Sachsen-Teschen, and it is from Duke Albert that the Albertina Palace takes its name. Today the Albertina is a public museum which is owned by the state. The museum is partly funded by the state, but a big part from the museum's money has to be earned through visitors. The museum contains 4 major collections, that is the graphic arts collection, an architectural collection, the collection Badlina, and last but definitely not least, the photographic collection. The graphic arts collection represents the biggest holdings of the Albertina. It comprises around 50,000 drawings and watercolors, as well as some 900,000 graphic artworks. And the Albertina, as you can see, owns works from artists like Albrecht Dürer, Michelangelo, Leonardo, Rembrandt, and many other Italian artists. And actually many exhibitions of the Albertina are based on these holdings. There were shows on Albrecht Dürer, Michelangelo, Van Gogh, Rubens, and Rembrandt. In contrast to the graphic collection, the collection of photography is much younger and it is also smaller. The photographic collection was founded 15 years ago in 1999, and at the same time the Department of Photography was established in the Albertina. Klaus Albrecht Schröder, who is the current director of the Albertina, founded the department. And he appointed Monika Faber as chief curator, and when she left in 2011, I was offered her job and became a young, but I became her successor. 5 people currently work in the Department of Photography. Our fields of work and research are divided by periods. We have 2 curators who are specialized in the 19th century, another curator focuses on the turn of the century, and I'm specialized in contemporary and 20th century photography. In addition to the curator, a specialized photo conservator works also for the department. In Austria, the Albertina is the only art museum with its own department of photography. There are other museums which collect photography, for example, the Museum of Modern Art in Vienna or in Salzburg. But in contrast to the Albertina, photography is part of the general art collection. The other museums don't have curators specialized in photography or have a photographic department. Besides the Albertina, there are also other art institutions which do shows on photography now and then, but the Albertina is the only museum which does them regularly. We produce 1 to 2 exhibitions a year, and our exhibitions are always related to our collection. The collection of photography contains over 100,000 photographs. In addition, we also have a huge collection of cameras, and one of the oldest libraries specialized in photography. While the photographs are completely inventoried, we are currently working on the collection of cameras and books to make it accessible to the public. The unique quality of the photographic collection of the Albertina lies in its variety and diversity. Our collection ranges from historical to contemporary photography, and the collection includes pictures from between the beginning of photography, that is the 1830s, up to 2014. The materials we have are accordingly very diverse. We have daguerreotypes, but also saltpaper prints, gum prints, and autochromes. Our photographic collection is based on 4 different holdings. And these holdings were partly acquired by the Albertina when the department was founded 15 years ago. This is very important. Almost our whole collection was bought and brought together when the department was founded in 1999. And these 4 different holdings are, first of all, a contemporary holding which focuses on the photographic genre of street photography. Then we own the estate of the so-called Langewiesche Verlag. Langewiesche is a publishing company that published books with pictures by famous photographers such as Luce Moholy-Nagy or Albert Rangel-Page in the 1920s. And the biggest part of our collection consists of the estate of the so-called Austrian Federal Education and Research Institute for Graphics in Vienna. In short, it's just the Graphic Institute. And this institute is especially interesting because it was founded in 1888 and it was the first school in the entire world to specialize in photography and reproduction technology. Their collection was passed on to the Albertina on permanent loan. And another part of our collection contains photographs from the Albertina's original holdings, and the Albertina has held these pictures since 1950. Although the photographic department is relatively new, photography was always part of the collection of the Albertina. Photography was collected from the beginning, which is logical with regard to the collection profile of the Albertina. Besides drawings, the Albertina also focused on reproductions such as woodcuts or engravings. Photography is the reproduction medium par excellence and accordingly always formed a part of the collection. But it was only in 1999 that the photographic collection was properly constituted. These original holdings include some of the most ambitious attempts of photographic documentation in the history of photography. You can see here examples of the Austrian photographer Gustav Jägermeier. Jägermeier wanted to document the glaciers of the Austrian Alps in 1863, and he made pictures during a very expensive expedition, which he wanted to publish in form of albums. Here is another example, and if you look closely, you can see the co-workers who sit on top of the glaciers, so you get a feeling for the size of the mountains. You can see them just on top of the mountains. Shooting photographs beyond the studio or in the open was extremely complex. Not only were the negatives huge and had a format of 30 to 40 centimeters, the negatives also had to get sensitized just before the pictures were taken. After the exposure, the negatives had to be developed immediately. This means that Jägermeier had to take his entire chemical equipment and also his darkroom with him to the mountains. As it was naturally very cold, he had to move his chemicals permanently, otherwise they would have frozen immediately. Here you can see a picture of Jägermeier's carriage, which includes actually a darkroom that is movable, and you can also see the huge size of his camera, which is mounted on top of the wagon. As you can imagine, the expedition was very expensive, and actually it was far too expensive for Jägermeier. He went bankrupt and lost his livelihood. There were similar attempts of photography in the original holdings of the Albertina, and these are examples of the Austrian photographer Paul Pretsch, and Pretsch worked for the Austrian printing establishment. When these pictures were taken, photography was not seen as a product of human creativity or art. What interested Pretsch was its apparent identical quality with the object of representation. He wanted to acquire or document the whole city of Vienna through a very accurate strategy of documentation. And Pretsch chose a very conceptual approach, which you can see in the saltpaper prints of the Schönbrunn Palace. The first picture which you can see here gives us an overview of the area and shows us the palace in a distant view. And the following photographs were taken inside the palace court. It is interesting that Pretsch didn't take just one picture, but shot several photographs, which can be assembled as a series. Put together, these pictures show us a panoramic view. Here is another example of the main building, the main facade. As you can see, Pretsch shows a very conceptual approach to document or to archive every aspect of the building. His approach wasn't restricted just to Schönbrunn Castle. Rather, he wanted to document the whole topography of Vienna. In this sense, his attempt can be understood as an early Google Earth project, but as you can imagine, his idea couldn't be realized due to technical difficulties. And again, the project was far too expensive. In the end, Pretsch also went bankrupt. Ambitious, but no sense for the money, obviously. While these are examples of pictures that were already part of the original collection of the Albertina, the biggest part of our holdings come from the Graphic Institute. These holdings were integrated in 1999 into the collection of the Albertina. As I mentioned before, the Graphic Institute was the first school in the entire world where students could learn about photography and reproduction technology. It was founded in 1888 and still exists today. And the Graphic Institute collected photography from the beginning of the medium. The pictures were used as demonstration materials for the students during classes, but the Graphic Institute also collected works by their teachers and by the students. And it is thanks to this collection that the Albertina has fantastic examples of different photographic techniques. The collection of the Graphic Institute contains some of the earliest examples of photography, for example, the book Pencil of Nature. The book was published very early. It was published in 1844 by the British photographer William Henry Fox Talbot, and the book contains calotype prints. And these prints are essential for the history of photography because they're based on the first negative-positive process. Talbot basically used a piece of paper as a negative, and through the physical contact with the negative, with photosensitive paper, he was able to reproduce the positives. In contrast to the color types, the French daguerreotypes were unique or single pictures. Daguerreotypes were mainly produced between the 1840s and the early 1860s. The production was very complicated as the exposure time was incredibly long and the handling of the chemicals very complex. And the Albertina owns about 500 daguerreotypes. And there is one special one, and that's this one, because this daguerreotype is the oldest known photograph of Vienna. And it was made by Andreas Ritter von Ettingshausen before the 1840s. Besides these early examples, the Albertina also has a large collection of scientific photography. The founder of the Graphic Institute in 1888 was Josef Maria Eder. He was not only concerned with the different forms of photography, he was also interested in the usage of photography for scientific purposes. From the invention of the medium, photography was used for scientific research. Eder himself used photography to explore X-ray photography, which was completely new at the time. Josef Maria Eder, luckily for us, also collected scientific photographs by colleagues from other countries, and here is an example you surely know, as it is by the famous French photographer Etienne Jules Marey. In these pictures, Marey analyzed movement sequences of animals, I think it's a chicken and a dog, and through multiple exposures on one negative, he made different moments of a motion sequence visible. Using photography, Marey succeeded in making moments visible that normally can't be perceived by the human eye because it works far too slowly. Eder also collected other scientific works. Here's a very famous example by the French doctor Duchesne de Boulogne. And de Boulogne did research on the possibilities of human expression, and he stimulated faces with electricity and documented the facial reactions. And his pictures were not only important in the context of science, they are also very often compared to the work of artists like Egon Schiele, which you have on the right side. As you can see in Egon Schiele's drawings, the faces are equally distorted. The Graphic Institute furthermore collected the works of teachers and pupils. Among others, the Albertina has photographs of artists like Anton Josef Tretschka, Rudolf Koppitz, and Heinrich Kühn. And these photographers are very well known in the context of the photographic style of pictorialism. Pictorialism started in England and was a very influential movement after the turn of the century. It started at a time when photography was not considered to be art, but merely a possibility to reproduce reality. As you may know, pictorialists wanted to enhance the status of photography as art, and Rudolf Koppitz and Heinrich Kühn created works that were technically based on photography, but didn't look like photography. In fact, the pictures looked much more like paintings. Heinrich Kühn, for example, used complicated printing techniques such as GAM prints, and these techniques allowed him to render the motifs picturesque and unsharp. One could say that the artist hit the photographic roots in order to produce pictures which look like impressionistic paintings. And this becomes especially clear in the example by Heinrich Kühn on the left side. This picture shows a landscape, but the outlines of the forms are completely blurry and it is completely abstract. While Heinrich Kühn was an amateur photographer, Rudolf Koppitz was a teacher at the Graphic Institute. Here you can see the most famous work by Rudolf Koppitz called Movement Study, which dates from 1927. And the picture shows Russian dancers, and Koppitz staged a nude female figure in front of dancers who wear black dresses. And what is interesting that one can clearly see the influence of other Viennese artists here, and one you surely all know is Gustav Klimt. And Gustav Klimt, for example, influenced the graphic austerity, the clarity of the composition, but also the symbolist content of the picture. The pictures I've just shown you are only a few examples of the holdings of the Graphic Institute. Completely different from the holdings is the estate of the Langewiesche publishing house, which represents the third part of our collection. Langewiesche was the publishing house of well-known books like the so-called Blaue Bücher. In English it's called the Blue Books or the Iron Hammer. And the publishing company had a huge archive with photographs that were used for reproduction in the books. A focus is on architectural and landscape photography between 1920 and 1950. And the archive also includes pictures by some photographers of the so-called New Objectivity. One of its most important artists is the German photographer Lucia Moholy-Nagy, who took most of her pictures in the 1920s and in the 1930s. And Lucia Moholy emphasized aspects which are typical for photography, such as sharpness. This photographic quality becomes visible in her series of the famous Bauhaus building in Dessau, which was designed by the architect Walter Gropius. And Lucia Moholy focuses on the form of the architecture, which she transforms into sharp, precise, and very cool cubes in the picture. The pictures of the Langewiesche archive were used as a printing device. And this is why the photographs, as you can see here, are heavily retouched. For example, in the pictures of Lucia Moholy, the sky and the walls of the building were brightened. And this is why the collection gives us a unique insight into the usage of photography for publishing or commercial purposes. You can also clearly see this in the following example. This photograph shows a public square with a fountain in a German city. And at the border of the picture are notes for the retouch. And all the people who were originally in the picture were completely retouched out of the photograph. Initially, there was also an iron grating around the fountain. As you can see, it was retouched, but the editors made one rather big mistake. Although they removed the grating, the editors forgot to retouch its shadow. If you look closely on the detail, you clearly can see the shadow of the fence on the right side of the fountain, making the picture become completely illogical. As you can see, the photographic collection includes many different forms of photography, ranging from early photography to scientific and art photography. And most of the exhibitions and publications of the Albertina are based on these holdings. To give you an example, our scientific photographs were exhibited in a show entitled Photography and the Invisible in 2009. And the pictorialist works of Heinrich Kühn were the premise for a large exhibition entitled Heinrich Kühn, the Perfect Photograph. And the photography of the glaciers, which I showed you at the beginning, were part of an exhibition called Infinite Ice. In addition to exhibitions, the Albertina also publishes a book series on its collection. Topographic shots of Vienna were, for example, analyzed in a book called Street Life in Vienna. Our daguerreotypes were not only explored in an exhibition, but also in a book. And this book project is ongoing, and the next book which will be published is based on my thesis, which was on the relation of photography and architecture. The exhibitions I just told you about were curated by my predecessor in the Albertina, Monika Faber. She accurately exhibited the biggest part of our historical collection, which is why I shifted the exhibition program to a more contemporary approach. I focus on the modern holdings, which are the fourth part of our collection. The focus of this part of the collection is on so-called street photography. It includes works by artists like Robert Frank, William Eggleston, Stephen Shore, William Klein, and also Henri Cartier-Bresson. And we are continually expanding these holdings. 2 years ago, I bought works by the Japanese photographer Shomei Tomatsu, and last year, for example, we were able to acquire works by the Ukrainian photographer Boris Mikhailov. And, well, this brings me to the most problematic part of my job, money for acquisitions. Like everywhere in Europe, I think the Albertina has hardly any money for exhibitions. We are mostly dependent on sponsors, donations, and fundraisings. For example, the acquisition of Boris Mikhailov was only possible with the help of a trust. There are other examples. Recently, I bought photographs by the French photographer Brassai, and I could buy them only with the help of a private sponsor who wants to support the photographic collection of the Albertina. Actually, big parts of the collection, but also the book series I mentioned before, are only possible with the help of private sponsors. Also, some of our exhibitions are only possible with the help of supporters. Our last exhibitions were especially based on the contemporary holdings. I'm going to show you some examples. In 2012, we did a show on the American photographer Joel Sternfeld. We exhibited 11 series by the photographer dating from the early 1970s to 2007. Joel Sternfeld became famous for his color photography. Next to William Eggleston and Stephen Shore, Joel Sternfeld is the most important artist of the so-called new color photography. These photographers used color for artistic purposes at a very early time. While color is completely common in art photography today, it was not considered to be art in the 1970s. Color was only used in commercial photography, such as in advertising and in fashion, and traditional artistic photography had to be in black and white. Joel Sternfeld's series American Prospects was at the center of the exhibition. Sternfeld traveled across the US for years, capturing the country and its inhabitants, and most of his pictures explore political and social issues. And his works show very often an irony which is visible in this picture, which you all might already know. It shows a fireman buying a pumpkin while actually in the background a house is burning down. The show was also on tour. It started in Germany and then it also traveled to Berlin and to Amsterdam. And international cooperations are sometimes, or very often, the only possibility for us to finance bigger projects, as the costs are shared between the partners. We curated another exhibition called The Body as Protest in 2012. In this show, we exhibited works by artists who used their own body to visualize a protest against norms of society. The show was centered around a group of works by the artist John Copland from the collection of the Albertina. And Copland was an English artist who turned to photography only at the age of 64. He produced large format pictures in which he focused on his own nude body. And Copland mercilessly documented his aging process. He also fragmented his body through close-ups. And while you might not perceive these pictures as beautiful, Copland made aspects of humanity visible which are in general hidden in society. Art and media normally show us only images of perfect, of flawless, and of young bodies. And Copland rejected such ideals and visualized taboos like aging or death. In the exhibition, we confronted Copland's pictures with other artists, and the show included also the Italian artist della Rocca. della Rocca was a conceptual artist who examined women's conditions of living, and sadly, at the age of 38, della Rocca was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And this topic provided the subject for this very impressive image. The picture basically shows an X-ray of her head in which she replaced the tumor with her own fist. And with the erected fist, della Rocca actually is protesting again against her own body. And della Rocca's work shows us how human identity is determined by the body. And whether caused by age or illness, the decline of the body makes us aware of our own transitoriness. Our current exhibition is more optimistic and brings me again to your country, because the show is based on a film you surely know, as it is by the Italian director Michelangelo Antonioni, Blow Up. And the show examines the film's relations to photography. Here are some installation shots. As you might know, Blow Up was shot in London in 1966. And the film is extremely interesting for photo curators as it shows different genres of photography. Not only is Thomas, who is the main protagonist, a fashion photographer, he also works as a social reportage photographer. Antonioni included different works of art in Blow Up, and Antonioni also hired a number of interesting photographers in the production of the film. The photojournalist Don McCullin was on set, as were the fashion photographers John Cohen and David Montgomery, as well as the Italian paparazzo Tazio Secchiaroli. They served as models for Antonioni's protagonist, took photographs for Blow Up, and made the work available to the filmmaker. Maybe the plot, shortly, the story is about a fashion photographer who secretly takes a picture of a pair of lovers in a park. Later he develops them and blows them up. And on the blow-ups, Thomas finds a mysterious man with a gun and a motive that looks like a body. But the blow-ups don't make the body clearly visible. On the contrary, the pictures get blurry and show us only their grain. And Antonioni shows us through the blow-ups that reality is always constructed through medias. The famous blow-ups, which Thomas shoots in a park, are the centerpiece of our exhibition. We found them in a private collection. And Antonioni hired the famous photojournalist Don McCullin to produce them. I did an interview with Don McCullin, and he told me that he had to strictly follow Antonioni's instructions. McCullin had to position himself in the same places as Thomas in the film to reproduce his perspective. He also used the same Nikon F camera which Thomas uses in Blow Up. And neither Antonioni nor the actor David Hemmings had any experience with photography. McCullin was also on the set as an advisor. The photographer explained to the actor how to handle the camera correctly and was also instructed about the body language connected with using it. McCullin also confirmed the famous legend that Antonioni painted the grass in the park. When the director started filming the scene in the park, he found the meadow was dried up, so he sent his assistants to buy green paint. And the green color of the meadow, which you see in the movie, was actually completely painted. The exhibition not only explores the photohistorical context of Blow Up, but also presents real works of art which Antonioni integrated into his film. In Blow Up, Thomas works on a book with reportage photographs featuring homeless people, and in one scene the photographer presents his book dummy to the editor. And the pictures you see in this scene were actually also taken by Don McCullin at the beginning of the 1960s in London. We were able to track them down in a private collection, and Antonioni integrated McCullin's pictures for narrative purposes. It was actually 24 images, and we show them all in the exhibition for the very first time. But we were also able to track down other images. Antonioni involved real fashion photographers in his movie, like David Montgomery. Montgomery is a US-American fashion photographer living in London. And before shooting his film, Antonioni visited Montgomery in his studio to watch him taking pictures. David Montgomery also appears in the beginning of the film. We see him taking pictures of the model Donial Luna on Hoxton Market in London. And you can see this scene in a film still of David Montgomery shooting the model. You see it actually here. This is David Montgomery, and he's taking a picture of Donial Luna. And Montgomery told me when this scene was shot that he actually made the fashion photographs featuring Luna that he pretends to take in the film. Since David Montgomery was no actor, he had to really take pictures in order to be able to play the scene convincingly. And in the picture on the left, you surely recognize Michelangelo Antonioni in the right center of the image. But a last example, we also included Antonioni's own works called Le Montagne Incantate, which we borrowed from the Archivio Michelangelo Antonioni in Ferrara. And these works are very interesting in relation to the concept of the blow-up of the movie, because in these works the filmmaker enlarged watercolors through photography, making the material qualities of the paper and the application of the paint visible. Antonioni himself described the main protagonist of Blow Up as a person who wants to see more closely. In conclusion, I hope that you were able to gain an interesting insight into the organization, the collection, and the exhibition program of the photographic collection of the Albertina. And I'm looking forward to hear some interesting questions.
Thank you. Grazie. Thank you very much. Grazie Walter, è abbastanza interessante trovare che l'immagine della swing in London in realtà è stata creata, ovvero gli italiani hanno contribuito, italiani come Michelangelo Antonioni hanno contribuito a creare questa immagine della swing in London in una maniera molto fattiva. L'altro fatto interessante è che un museo, diciamo, può essere paragonato al Metropolitan di New York, decide a fine anni 90 di stabilire un dipartimento di fotografia e più recentemente, quindi 3 anni fa, di assumere un curatore di una generazione diversa per curare delle mostre di fotografia contemporanea tematiche, non solo tematiche ma proprio sulla teoria della fotografia. E questo è abbastanza interessante come fenomeno. In Europa quindi abbiamo questi diversi modelli di ripensare la fotografia e soprattutto contrastare la profezia di Benjamin che nel 1931 dichiarò che, che l'arte era morta, che la fotografia avrebbe rovesciato il trono del giudizio che ha sede nel museo. Naturalmente non è accaduto, però il museo moderno soffre e è stato ripensato in vari modi, ma soprattutto con il museo postmoderno come quello della Tate Modern, che riproduce se stesso, Tate Modern oppure anche Guggenheim. Guggenheim appunto di New York, che a fine anni 80 ha deciso di rilanciare il proprio museo, di riprodurlo in varie sedi. Bene, questi sono i miei primi commenti, magari possiamo allargare al pubblico se ci sono delle domande oppure delle osservazioni o dei commenti o delle richieste di ulteriori approfondimenti.
Non dovete essere timidi, capisco italiano un po'.
Volevo chiedere se
Arriva.
in italiano, visto
Okay,
che...
translation.
Ok. Volevo chiedere se le fotografie conservate nella sezione di grafica rimangono lì e se vivono una vita separata rispetto alla sezione di alle quelle conservate in sezione di fotografia.
No. Actually, when the Department of Photography was founded in 1999, only then we found out about the other photographs. And even now and then we find photography in between the so-called graphic art, but it gets excluded from the collection of graphic art, and we include it in our department, in our inventorizing system, actually. So the pictures get part of the Department of Photography.
Grazie.
Okay.
Ma a me ha fatto effetto ascoltare la comunicazione di Walter Moser in cui si spiega che questo dipartimento poi ha 15 anni di vita e anche in realtà rapidamente articolato le provenienze di questi fondi fotografici, però poi ha dispiegato un manuale di storia della fotografia, cioè le collezioni di un museo come l'Albertina automaticamente ci consentono, sulla base dei pochi indizi fotografici che ci ha mostrato, di valutare l'esistenza della possibilità della fotografia già nella collezione dell'Albertina. Insomma, questo è già molto interessante. Voglio sapere la consistenza di questo patrimonio, forse mi era sfuggita l'informazione quante migliaia, quante decine di migliaia di foto ammonta il patrimonio fotografico, se è possibile saperlo. Insomma.
We have about 100,000 photographs, but also a huge collection of cameras, really from the beginning of the history of photography, cameras for the daguerreotypes, etc., and also one of the oldest libraries specialized on photography. But this is through the collection of the Graphic Institute, which I've shown you some examples of. But all in all, we have about 100,000, a little more actually. And it's growing, but not as fast as I wanted to, actually.
Il pubblico viennese è attento alle manifestazioni
Of the
di
exhibition?
fotografia?
Yeah, they are.
Pubblico.
Yeah. Because the Albertina is one of the few museums who make exhibitions of photography regularly, so yeah, they're very attentive. That's a good thing about Vienna, that I'm almost without concurrence.
Grazie.
About collectors, do you have active, dedicated collectors to? Avete collezionisti attenti alla fotografia, dedicati alla fotografia?
We have some in Vienna, but not many actually. We have 5 to 6 which also support the collection of the Albertina, but strangely, in contrast to collectors of graphic art or contemporary art, mostly they prefer to be hidden or to stay a secret, but they support us, yeah. But that's also that many collectors do not just collect photography, but collect contemporary art, and photography is also included. So collectors who are specialized in photography, we have only a few in Vienna, because the majority collects different arts, from paintings to sculpture to drawings, and also photography.
What about the education? Do you have photography courses at universities or Academy of Fine Arts? Ci sono insegnamenti di fotografia nell'università,
Yeah.
accademie
Yes,
throughout
we have.
Austria?
Yeah. Basically, there are 3 universities in Vienna who teach photography. It's the art history, where I started, then the Academy of Arts and University of Applied Arts. And they teach photography. So also the history of photography, but also the theory of photography. So, and also many students come to Vienna to become a photographer, to study photography at the university. And it's growing and growing.
E volevo sapere come sono rappresentati i fotografi italiani all'interno delle vostre collezioni, fotografi italiani contemporanei e non solo, la presenza italiana.
We have hardly Italian photographers, I have to admit. I'm very sorry. No, but we have Luigi Ghiri, for example. We have Ketty La Rocca. But we have the brothers Alinari. But we only have a few. If I know Italian photographers, yes, I do. Because of you. No, but yeah, absolutely.
On concentration in photography, really. Is it architectural photography? Is it film and stills photographs?
I think the good thing in photography is actually that you don't have to decide, because photography can be so many images. It can be scientific photography, it can be functional photography, it can be art photography, it can be documentation. So this is unique in photography. There's so many different forms of photography, and I think that's the beautiful thing. So I don't have a problem actually to make an exhibition about daguerreotypes, but also about an exhibition like Blow Up, which is on the relationship between film and photography. That's very important. I think you don't have to decide. But our major focus is on contemporary photography, or 60s, 70s up to the present.
Questa è anche la ragione per cui sei stato assunto nel museo. This is the reason why you were hired at the museum,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Also because, well, I worked in different museums in Vienna from the beginnings of my studies, and the current director, he wanted somebody who knows also the other medias. And that's also my personal opinion, that you understand photography only if you know also the other mediums, like painting, for example. So this also leads us to the question if institutions, or especially for photography, are really necessary, or if the art institution should integrate photography more and more.
Come facevano a modificare le foto una volta?
Puoi ripetere la...
Come facevano a modificare le foto una volta? Tipo nella foto che abbiamo visto dove non era stato tolto l'ombra del cancello, però avevano tolto tutte le persone. Cioè una volta non esisteva Photoshop, quindi come facevano?
It basically was Photoshop before Photoshop, so they just painted the picture or the negative. So it's very easy. They just took some paint onto the picture or the negative, and then they took another positive of this retouched picture.
C'è ancora qualche domanda? Vabbè, certo.
Ecco, qui in Italia c'è una fiera che rappresenta molto la fotografia italiana, che si chiama MIA, e si è appena conclusa a Milano in questi giorni. Invece volevo sapere a livello internazionale qual è la fiera che si dedica alla fotografia più importante in Europa.
That is actually very simple. It's Paris Photo. That is once a year in Paris in November, and it's the biggest fair for photography. But if you're really interested in contemporary photography, maybe you should go to the off spaces of Paris Photo, but because as it's a very expensive fair, they're normally the famous photographers. But Paris Photo definitely is I think the best place for photography at a fair.
Qualche dubbio, qualche curiosità ancora? Serata animata.
Ma io sono curiosa di conoscere la futura programmazione dell'Albertina Museum rispetto alla fotografia e chiedere, forse non ho capito bene, se questa di Blow Up è la prima mostra che hai curato tu o se no. Ok, di fotografia, ok. Grazie.
Blow Up was my fourth exhibition. The first one was Joel Sternfeld, then The Body's Protest, and then a retrospective on Louis Balls, and the last one is Blow Up. The next exhibition of photography will be in May 2015, and it will be on Lee Miller. And afterwards, in 2016, we will do a show on Provoke, the Japanese photography from the 60s.
Volevo sapere se la collezione è consultabile anche in rete o se bisogna per forza venire a Vienna.
Actually, you should go to Vienna because seeing them as original is completely different. No, but we are starting to put our collection online. We have some major pieces online. I think we have 5,000 pictures online, but we are putting more and more online. And so in the next years, our whole collection should be online, but there is a problem with the copyright. So, but at least in 5 years, I think we will have finished. And like in the Tate Modern, the whole collection of the Albertina, also the graphic arts will be online. But nevertheless, come to Vienna. Yeah, originals.
Ecco, volevo sapere se si continuerà a avere una particolare attenzione per i rapporti tra fotografia e cinema, che so che è un campo che ti interessa particolarmente, su cui tu stai lavorando e studiando.
Yes, definitely, but not in forms of exhibition or maybe a smaller exhibition, because my PhD is also on film stills. Film stills are photographs that are taken by a photographer on the set of a movie production. And yes, it's my personal interest actually, and I will continue to write about it and to publish about it, and also maybe do a smaller show on film stills. But the Blow Up exhibition was my attempt to really show my personal interest actually.